I mean, I'm excited to do this. I think like so many people are curious about RemNote. Like I think it's like interesting. It's kind of this. It's sort of under the radar, but like at the same time, it has feature parity in a lot of ways to like Rome, which has been getting incredibly popular. But like it also has this like very unique take on it too, with the spaced repetition. So again, yeah, I think people are really interested and excited to see this. Okay, great. So Martin, you are the founder of RemNote. You've been supposedly, like from last I seen, like you've been working on this for how long?
So the code began in the beginning of January 2017, and the ideas were developing for a few months before then. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's crazy to me. And so like what was your context? Like what was your situation when you started developing this? Like why is it that you started building it?
I think that there were a few of them. So at the time, I was an undergraduate student studying computer science. So the first kind of frustration that motivated this was the feeling that I was spending all this effort in classes, trying to internalize things, and then just immediately forgetting all of it the following semester or following year. So that sparked that interest in exploring kind of different memory tools and memory techniques. And that's where I discovered spaced repetition. And then there had been another sort of latent interest in developing more procedural ways of thinking or formalizing my way of thinking for a few years, I guess, at that point. And I never really found a great workflow in that I used a few other kind of outliner tools or just used a bunch of paper kind of tools. But again, they didn't really work for me. So those frustrations and my just general desire to be able to capture more of my thoughts really just boiled over at that point, and I decided that something new needed to be made. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's so interesting. I what I love about that is that like that means you started building it to solve a problem that you had. So I'm really curious what how is it that your users have also influenced the way that you build RemNote and what gets built into it?
Yeah. So it's it's supposed to be a tool for thought, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that that label means that it needs to be able to support a wide range of different kinds of thought and a wide range of different kinds of workflows. So part there, I think that's both baked into the design, um, and the design then is guided by sort of like anvil examples that users have shown me. So um, some of these have been big surprises to me, to be honest, in that they're on. So I do calls with users sometimes, and I have people using it as sort of a CRM, people using it as kind of just like a daily journal tracking, people using it for classes, and the overall goal when interacting with users, I guess from my end, is to understand the kind of core problems and workflows that they're trying to solve or accomplish, and then make sure that the tool is designed in a both general and precise enough way to support those workflows while still being easy to onboard. So I don't think that's a very precise answer because it's trying to be general there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
something more precise might be useful. So just uh, the I started sort of with the workflow in mind of taking ideas that you were wanting to internalize, reformulating them for yourself, and then internalizing them mainly through spaced repetition. Um, and there were sort of a few iterations on that, just at a personal level. This is before there were users, so maybe I'm diverting the question a little bit, but um, and there it was, I think, really just the same sort of process though, of really trying to understand what kind of mental workflows I was trying to do, what goals I wanted to get out of that, and then just experimenting with a lot of different design options to see what worked the best. So now that there's a larger user base, it's been fun to do that a bit more in public and do that with people,
Mhm.
bounce ideas off of people. Yeah.
One thing that really struck me, is like you and I have had one call before where you were walking me through a little bit about like how RemNote worked, and I was like saying like, okay, here's some of the things that I wish were there. Here's some of the things that like like were frustrating me. You literally sent me like a week or two later an email that was like, hey, here's the things that we've changed since your call, and here's how we've taken that feedback. And I think that like sort of thing is, it's very important to making like us, low level users, lowly users are feel heard, or citizens, I guess.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, well, I think that part of my motivation for this call is to help users, but I've also honestly been surprised at how useful have found them.
Hmm.
I think part of that has been discovering that there exists this much larger community of people interested in these kind of tools, like yourself, than I had previously realized. But the other part is just, again, seeing where people get stuck, seeing what kind of workflows people are trying to do, and making sure the design encapsulates that.
Can I also want to ask, like, then what's the biggest what are some of your favorite like examples of situations where your users have surprised and amazed you with the ways that they use RemNote?
Yeah. Um, So one, let's see. So there's a few type of examples that come to mind. Um, so the first example is just someone who uh, has kind of been using it for the core, or maybe the initial kind of just structuring knowledge that you're learning in classes and formulating that. And they've just done it really well in a way that seems effective for them. Just linking things up very well, really reformulating ideas, renaming things to themselves, and so on. Um, Another idea that comes to mind is someone using it for like customer relations management, where they were making their workflow was basically they had sort of just daily journaling, and throughout the day they would write about today I'm working with this person from this company, and we're working on this project and they have these needs, and they were using the kind of references and linking features and portals to be able to quickly query their knowledge for when have I previously worked with this person,
Hmm.
what were this person's needs beforehand, um, and I thought that they were just doing that in a nice way. Um, what
Did
else?
spaced repetition play a role in that,
So
or
part of
was it more the interlinking that was useful there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So part of the call was discussion about they weren't using spaced repetition yet, and they were asking how it could integrate into their workflow. Um, I didn't. Uh, I'm not sure if they're using it now or not. Um, I well, we talked about some options for if I really wanted to know this specific detail about this person, or if I really wanted to internalize kind of the key problems that this business needs to solve or something. Um, then maybe those are the kind of things that you could internalize, and that would be useful. But they weren't using it quite yet. Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm curious, like if you wouldn't mind showing, like I'm curious what sorts of ways spaced repetition has um, impacted your life and your workflow.
Yeah. And I can switch on the screen recording at some point as well.
Yeah, absolutely, go for it.
Okay. This is just a doc of stuff that I of links that we could jump into if I want or if we want. So the first example are just when I'm reading papers or in a class, taking those ideas, resynthesizing for myself, and then trying to internalize them. You can see this, by the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So here, this is kind of my list of papers that I've read recently. Um, and my goal with each of these papers is to kind of break down the core ideas and reformulate them for myself so that I can generate cards from them. So this one might be a little difficult. Let's see if we can actually, what would be a better one? Okay, so here there is a pretty famous now um, kind of machine learning artificial intelligence system called AlphaZero. I'd read about it a few times and not really gotten it, so this is my attempt again to internalize this. So here I'm saying that there's this concept that sort of exists in the world. It's called AlphaZero. And to internalize this idea, I've given it some one sentence, sort of very rough sketch of the idea, and then also have broken it down a lot into the different details of the idea. So the one sentence sketch that I have in my head for AlphaZero is that it's similar to this previous paper called AlphaGo, but it's modified to only learn through a technique called self-play. This is all reinforcement learning stuff. And anywhere that I type these 2 colons here, spaced repetition flashcard is automatically generated. So every so often while I'm practicing, I'll have this prompt of what is the sort of canonical way that when you hear the word AlphaZero, what do you immediately want to think about? And for me, I decided that I wanted to have this connection of both AlphaZero and self-play. And then all these little questions below are breaking down that idea so that if I'm ever wondering, for example, for AlphaZero, what are the amount of tricks involved compared to AlphaGo, then this is the answer that I want to come to mind. Or if I'm wondering about what the training procedure is for AlphaZero, then I want this list here to come to mind, and so on. So those are just kind of questions that I want to be able to mentally query myself about for AlphaZero. And then here, this thing that's in bold, that's sort of a sub-concept for AlphaZero, in that AlphaZero is this system which internally has a combined, how do I describe this? It uses a neural network for sort of 2 purposes at once. It has these 2 heads, it's another technical term. It kind of has these 2 outputs, and then I wanted to query for myself how these are used. So my goal here was, again, just to sort of break these down, and then everywhere that I have a bullet point here with these double colons, space repetition flashcard is generated. So normally these would just come up organically in my space repetition queue. I can just click through them here to show, but here I'm prompting myself to remember sort of a visualization for AlphaZero in terms of how it chooses its moves. At some point later, I would be thinking about how the value head is used, and what the most previous popular example was, which I think would be TD gammon. And then I would go through that training procedure. And by practicing this, I achieve a few effects. So first, I get to take all the work that I had done while writing this document to really internalize those ideas so that I can draw on them in my thinking later on. And the second effect that I often notice is that I then reformulate the ideas even more after the first few rounds of practice. Normally, unless it's something that you're already sort of familiar with, I need to either reformulate the idea a bit or add on extra questions. Maybe these might have been where some of these questions came from to really tighten up my understanding there. Or maybe I just recognize that there's a new connection that I want to make mentally, because when the card came up in my queue, I was in a certain state of mind, and now I had this connection sparked. So maybe that's even where this first definition came from. Yeah.
So I'm curious then, like, okay, do you think that this might lead to repetitious thought? You know, like if you're seeing the cards the same way every time that you see it, if you're being prompted to remember a specific formulation of this, you know, like how does this, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is how does this memory, how does this internalization of, you know, original context, I guess, that you're doing, how does that translate into creativity and synthesis?
I think it's a great question. I'm not sure if I have a super precise answer, but I guess I have a few things that I've tried myself. So one perspective could be that when I'm thinking about AlphaZero, I want to know the details as precisely as possible. But then when I'm brainstorming, I can then take those ideas and riff on them there. So if I'm brainstorming, which I generally do in RemNote, it's like some new RL algorithm or something, then I could start drawing on ideas about how AlphaZero works. So maybe I could be thinking about something and say, this reminds me of the kind of two-head thing from AlphaZero. So we have these two heads, and I could pull on that idea, and then maybe I'm writing some more. And in this way, I'm both reformulating those ideas for myself, trying to expand on them, but I always have access to those lower level details. I can even just pull them in here if I want to, so that I can help keep myself grounded. There's another argument that you can make, I guess, where maybe you want these ideas to become fuzzier over time. So maybe after, for example, a long spacing interval, sometimes I'll decide that when something comes up in my queue, I don't necessarily want this idea to stay around in my head anymore. Maybe I don't quite believe it. Maybe the reason I put it in there originally was to just bounce it off like myself in different states of mind to see if I still believe it. And sometimes my action will just be, this is now feels like a more specific instantiation of a more general principle. So I'll just go reify and write up that more general principle, and stop practicing this one. So
Can you show me that? Can you show me that?
you like an example of that?
Maybe a situation where you were like, yeah, this is more a more specific thing, example of a more abstract thing. Because like that's something I like to do a lot in Rome, is I very much like to think about things in terms of like, okay, I'm working on a specific thing. Is there a broader structure at play? So I'm curious how you do that, and also like that this idea of like the argument to be made that maybe you want ideas to get fuzzier over time. I'm curious, yeah, just more elaboration on that also, because I interrupted you there. But
Oh, no. Yeah, okay. Let me try, I can show you two things, I guess. So first, just that document on AlphaZero. Let me jump back to that. So I mentioned that I'd gone through this a few times. So I could see where else I've written about this. Oh, okay, it's already up actually. So I'd written about this idea in a few places, and apparently had to keep on trying to reformulate it for myself. So here it was in some old lab notebook. This document is this one here. It was on this document about Monte Carlo tree search. So with this idea, I worked on that a few times to really get that the right way that I wanted. And then, so that's, I guess, for a internalizing sort of someone else's idea. And then in terms of reformulating and trying to grow ideas for myself, part of the way, what should I show here? Let's jump to this one, I guess. So part of the way that I'm trying to do that now is through more of like an evergreen note style setup, where when I come across some new idea that feels a little bit general, I'll go and try to reify that into a evergreen note style claim, such as the ones that I have here. You can see that a number of these are still just kind of stubs that I want myself to elaborate on. But, oh, okay, so this is actually the one that we were talking about beforehand. So at some point, I was like, hey, this seems like a pretty general principle. Tools for thought need to support a wide range of thinking processes. So let me go reify that into an evergreen note, maybe jot down a few notes in here, and then like tag some of the examples beneath that. So I think those are probably the two main workflows that I use there. Either kind of, yeah, the space repetition one, or this kind of evergreen note restructuring thing.
Can you show us one of your evergreen notes? I'm curious, like what those pages look like.
Yeah.
And also like if yeah, I'm curious if there's any spaced repetition involved with the evergreen notes themselves.
Yeah, there are. So this is talking about Michael Nielsen.
He's a public figure. He doesn't count.
He is a public figure. Yeah, all right, fine. So this this was just sort of a few scratch notes here. I marked this one as more of a stub because this definitely doesn't seem like it's in a readable state yet. Most of my goal really when writing these evergreen notes is to just sort of go, let's see. So I think that my goal when writing the evergreen notes is really to try to find core ideas that I can then internalize with spaced repetition, is maybe one way to phrase it. So when I'm writing these, I'll often just be writing in one note and then say, hey, now I think I'm actually writing about a different topic. For example, I think that's what I had done here, in that I was writing and then I was thinking, oh, this actually reminds me of something else. Maybe we can pull this one open. And, oh, okay. And then I jumped to here and I guess abandoned this one at that point. So here's actually an example of where I internalize the space repetition a little bit here. When I have these two numbers, this is actually generating a space repetition card. So I came up with this hypothesis that there were a few kinds of new additional research that I wanted to see. So now occasionally I'll have this card come up, and I can either try to internalize that idea more. Maybe I'll have decided that I actually disagree with that idea a bit now. Here, there's this one's also generating a card, and then I wanted to remember my hypothesis for causes here. And here I just wanted to remember an example. What's another good one?
I think this is super interesting. I love how you are, internalizing ideas within this. Something I've seen similarly, I did a tour with Maggie Appleton recently, and she uses spaced repetition in Rome literally just to make sure that the evergreen note resurfaces, and just so it's top of mind. But like you're using spaced repetition, I think, in like a little bit more, how do I phrase this? I guess when looking through linked references and searching through and browsing through your notes through your hyperlinks, right? What that's essentially doing is that's trying to gather a train of thought, but something you said earlier when you were talking about your spaced repetition is you were saying, like, what do I want to come to mind? So that's essentially, it's like you're augmenting that search through linked references by making it quicker, because those are both filling the exact same roles. It's just that if it's internalized in your head, then it's just more automatic, like you don't need to do, or do you still need to do the searches through it? Like, do you think that the way that I'm characterizing this is fair, or do you disagree with it in some sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. I think that the underlying motivation here is that to synthesize a new idea, there's some currently hidden set of ideas that all need to come together in the right place at the same time, and then you need to be thinking about them, and then the new idea will sort of emerge. So the linked references are one way to achieve that here, in that when so actually maybe I can demonstrate a bit for that. So if I am organizing ideas together around something more conceptual, then I can start looking at all of the references that I have to that concept, and then try to synthesize together all the places that I've referred to them. And the goal is the same with keeping things in your head. I guess I don't know yet how much can be offloaded to the computer. And I think that depends a lot on the exact way in which the search algorithm or the user interface is set up. In that, I'm pretty confident right now that I can do different type of computations using the stuff that I've internalized than I can do within the tool. But I also am confident that I can do things using the tool that I definitely cannot just do in my own head, mainly due to, I guess, kind of memory constraints. So I think that you want some combination of both. I don't really know what the best combination is yet, but I think using both is a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it seems to me as though linked references are sort of, if we go with your assumption that insight, like in creativity, is coming from a bunch of ideas coming together in our brain at
Sure.
once. You know, like one of the ways that we like frame going through linked references is, oh, it's about sparking thoughts, right? So I'm looking through them and it's sparking new thoughts, right? That's sort of relying on it's sort of relying on short-term memory in a sense, you know, whereas if you have these things internalized in your head, then you don't need to see as much linked references in order to spark your creativity. This is me just riffing on this idea, but like, yeah, no, I can definitely see the way that this is tying into how much can the tool do, right, in order to help you gain insight.
Yeah. And so I think one example of maybe something that I can do in my brain that the tool can't do yet is take two ideas that are worded in different ways using different kind of linked references, and recognize that they're actually representing the same idea. Like find some analogy between them, or something like that. Um, and maybe as our machine learning tools get better, that's something that could be built into the tool to help offload some of that work as well. Um, so you can imagine some maybe more automation, or something along that kind of exploration short-term memory process that you're describing. Um, but yeah, I don't know what the right answer is yet.
Well, then I guess that leads into another area that I'm curious about, which is how are you using RemNote in order to build RemNote?
Yeah, I think, um, let's see, I think I'd collected some links maybe related to that. So, oh, so I would characterize that in kind of two ways. The first way, or let's call it three ways. So first, I just use it as sort of ongoing scratch notes. So if I'm implementing something, I found it incredibly useful to just capture each of the different parts of what I'm currently implementing, the next to-dos for each of those, and just be able to work on them within the tool. Here, maybe I can show an example. So I've recently been adding code blocks, and this is all kind of done now. It's in a testing phase. But when I started to work on this, so first I built this kind of design section down here. I had some sort of questions for myself. I broke it down into some categories. I had some sort of unsorted ideas. And then at some point I was like, okay, it seems like most of the important ideas are here. Let's just go try to figure out an implementation. So at that point, I switched to the section up here, and broke down the kind of different things that I needed to implement. So this is all done except for the testing phase. And for each of these, then I just, again, captured to offload the kind of tasks that I needed to do. So that's sort of just like when I'm in implementing mode. Then the second way that I use it that comes to mind is just for kind of knowledge accretion purposes, in the sense that we were talking about before, in that when I'm on a call with someone and they're talking about how they use RemNote right now for kind of maybe task management, but they have these certain workflows that aren't supported super well. Well, I just want to collect those ideas around into a single place, such that when I want to think about task management in RemNote, then I can quickly capture all those ideas. So I have some document called RemNote, and it just gets down, it's just super nested, to just organize all the ideas that I have here. And the kind of third way, I guess, is that evergreen note writing process that we were talking about before, in that I think that has been extremely useful in guiding the kind of design and philosophy, and in terms of better formulating exactly what workflows I want the tool to sort of solve. So that kind of like that tools for thought document that we were in a little bit ago, when I'm in sort of a designing mood, I'll often just jump into there, open up some evergreen note, and then begin bouncing between those. And that, again, helps me to capture those and helps get all the ideas in a single place so they can fight with each other. Um, what else can I show? So I also sort of maintain this kind of lab notebook type thing. Most of these are just calls with people who are hidden. Um, then I sort of have like an active uh, landing page map for myself mainly, where I have things that I'm actively working on, so I can quickly jump right back into them. Things that I want to design, some bugs that I need to go through. So it's so for RemNote, it's mostly about just there's a bunch of stuff that I need to be thinking about there. Try to offload as much of it into the tool as possible, um,
Mm-hmm.
and then just be able to pull on a specific subset of that when needed.
Okay. So I assume so it sounds like for those situations, maybe spaced repetition isn't used or isn't necessary in there, or is it worked into that?
It I think the main way that it has worked into there is in the evergreen notes, in that when
Mm-hmm.
there's some hypothesis that has happened to occur to me in some context that I want to get that repeated attention on, or that I want to internalize better, then I can just flip on that card and begin that process automatically. I don't tend to use it so much for the project management type stuff, in that, um, well, I guess there maybe there's a bit more of that element of that you were talking about beforehand, where you want some of that to be a bit fuzzier, um, in that if I'm brainstorming how to implement a specific feature or something, then I really just want to get those ideas out of my head to maybe leave fuzzier space for new ideas to emerge. Um, yeah, maybe there's an element there as well that um, these are all ideas that I already feel are pretty internalized. Um, Except for again the evergreen note ones where they're kind of things that I'm reaching for that I want to pull in. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess it doesn't. Space repetition doesn't play a huge part into the development itself, I guess. Yeah.
Right. Or I guess, yeah, just like the broader thing that I guess I'm trying to get at, and that I've been trying to get at, just in various contexts throughout this is, as someone who almost never uses spaced repetition,
Yeah.
what do you think is misunderstood about spaced repetition, and what do you think sorts of roles it has the opportunity to play in people's lives?
Okay, that's a great question. So far I've been mainly framing it as um, these are things from classes that I want to internalize for myself, or these are things that I'm reading that I want to internalize for myself, or things like that. I think that is maybe not the best framing, in that the way that I view it now, at least, is that if there's an idea or some piece of knowledge that I want to be able to think with, in that I want to be able to come to mind in the right context when I'm thinking about that similar idea. I want to be able to query really fast with low friction. Um, I want to be able to riff on. Then I need to, at some level, have that idea internalized. Not all your ideas need to be internalized, in that even within the tool, I think I actually have a screenshot of this. I So this top chart here are my total number of rem, and this bottom chart here are the ones with space repetition. So only like a sixth of them, or no, sorry, a fifth of them are actually space repetition cards. So I have some like core skeleton of ideas that I've internalized through space repetition, and these kind of act as like finger holds for me, and I can grow my other ideas around these, such that I can do that like diffuse sort of mental connection stuff in my head, and then leap to where that is in the tool to be able to continue drawing new connections there, or continue riffing on an idea. So um, maybe actually I can show another document. Um, so this is actually from a call that I had with someone yesterday who said that I can show this, I think. So, um, okay, so we kind of had a great discussion here. And as we were talking, I was recognizing that there were a lot of ideas that we were talking about that I wanted to be able to bring up in my own thoughts later on. So here we were talking about onboarding for some time, and I started constructing like little evergreen note stubs, and then each of these places where I have these two colons, that's generating a flashcard. So this is all actually probably very up your alley as well. So these were some ideas that I thought that he was phrasing very well. And I was like, I really want to capture that. And if I didn't write it down, then I would have no chance of remembering that. And then if I didn't use spaced repetition, I thought that I probably wouldn't be able to pull on it in the right mental context that I wanted to later on. So it's, yeah. So I think really just anything that you want to have internalized that you can draw on quickly, or that you want to repeatedly bounce off of yourself in different mental contexts. Those are the two main ways in which I use it, spaced repetition now.
That's fascinating. Because a lot of people seem to think about, like this dichotomy, like, do I care about remembering things, or do I care about synthesis and creativity? Which one's important? But it's very clear from the way that you're talking about it that that's a bad question to ask, or at least it's not a polar thing.
Yeah, I think that some extent of this has also been that maybe the spaced repetition community has not found the best way, has not found the best workflows for it yet, or something like that, because it's still, even with RemNote, I think that there's a lot of progress that can be made on making spaced repetition easier to use, and making it easier to frame those kind of choices for yourself as, is this an idea that I want to really internalize? Maybe I know now, maybe I don't. Maybe I'll just try to internalize it for now and I can stop later on. So a big part of the goal here is popularizing these ideas, but also trying to develop them to make them more practically useful in thinking. Yeah.
Okay. So just a couple more questions that I have. One is, in just because this is the sort of question you only get to ask a founder, right? Is like, so what do you think are the biggest opportunities you have with RemNote? Where do you want to see RemNote go? 5 years in the future, maybe 10 years in the future. I don't know. What do you think the future of RemNote is going to look like?
Well, there's the future of RemNote and the future of this, what I see as this growing community overall. In that, my hope is that I don't know where RemNote plays into this. It's very hard to predict for any startup, like what role it will play. But I think you can talk with more confidence about the overall like ideas in the community. So my hope with the community overall is that people is that we get to a point where kind of memory and where memory and deciding to think about an idea becomes much more of an intentional choice. And I think that would have very large kind of systemic effects. Like take most school, again, like high school right now, for example, it's just not really designed in a way to encourage long-term memory, I think. So I think that as the tools for thought community and the psychology communities and so on develop these ideas more, we can make it much easier for people to be intentional about what they want to remember, how they want to think about things, how they can draw on multiple viewpoints about an idea, synthesize them for themselves, and see these together. The other part of this is that I think that a lot of people would find a lot of value of building their own kind of personal memexes, for those reasons of being able to claim ownership over your own ideas, synthesize things, and so on. So I'm hopeful that becomes an idea that grows a lot more. And then I mentioned the school thing. So I'm hopeful that these ideas can somehow find fingerholds into the more traditional school systems as well. In that I felt a lot of frustration personally with forgetting what I was learning. Um, and I think that just students and learners and thinkers are just not very well equipped right now by the tools for thought community to think effectively, and that these kind of prosthetics are badly needed. Um, so that's where I don't know. That's the problems that I want the community to solve. In terms of RemNote specifically, I don't know. It's so hard to predict how things grow. Um,
Well,
I
then don't predict. Where do you want it to grow?
Yeah, okay, that's fair. So I want it to become a platform that solves the problems that I was talking about above. It's become that platform for me for sure, and then I do all of my thinking in it. I've used it to make that choice of, do I want to remember this, an intentional thing, um, and then there are like two branches out of that. So the first path is just trying to expand that to more people. Up until maybe the beginning of this year, uh, most of my work on this and most of the work on the tool was definitely still framed more from a academically motivated sense of, let's just only focus on finding the right ideas now. And then since the beginning of the year or so, I think we decided that these ideas seem pretty stable. Maybe let's try growing them to more people. But so I think growing that user base there is a pretty interesting goal. And then the second part of that is, again, I just think that there's a lot of ideas that still need to be discovered and fleshed out here. Um, so, uh, so I mean, some of the things that I'm thinking about now, I guess some of them have come up, some have not. So one of them is just rethinking exactly what that spaced repetition workflow is, making it easier for people to use, giving more people control over what they want to remember, and less kind of stressful choice points where you need to make choices about what you want to remember, but making that an easier process. The second thing is expanding on this idea that really everything in this tool is just kind of a sort of semantic graph or something for your knowledge, and building in more ways, or synthesizing and unifying ways to draw leverage from that metaphor to like allow you to build your own custom REM or your own custom plugins with something that we released a little bit ago. So really making this kind of a computable personal format. And then third, I think that there are powerful unexplored things around helping people combine their different knowledge bases. And other people are thinking about that now as well. But I think that's especially true with spaced repetition involved, and especially true when you're formulating things in terms of like concepts, as the tool encourages you to do. Because then I think you can do things like, how does this other person think about this concept? What kind of cards have they internalized for themselves about this concept? Or are there other related ideas that I could internalize to help me here? Or like, what is the best resource to learn this material? Or what is the best pathway through this material? And I think once you can actually see the real pathways that people have taken through their cards, that all becomes easier. So maybe that's so not so precise, but those are the kind of general pathways
Oh,
that
that's
I've been
great.
thinking about.
And what slash who are some of your biggest inspirations?
Oh yeah. Um, I think that there's a few communities of thought that uh, that I'm trying to draw on here. With varying levels of success, I guess. So the spaced repetition thing has its own community. Kind of Super Memo and Wozniak and those type of people did a great job of figuring out how to relate that, how to make that powerful with the computer in the 80s. There's a bunch of inspirations from maybe from the AI community, uh, especially like Seymour Papert and people, in terms of building languages to think with, and uh, encouraging learners to inspect their own knowledge and think about their own knowledge procedurally and build their own ideas in a meaningful way. There are a lot of kind of design inspirations that I think are incredible, like Workflowy, for example, with popularizing this idea of nested bullets as a way to maybe restrict your attentional focus. That's something that's really powerful. Oh, I'm definitely missing people. I mean, there's the whole kind of intelligence documentation community that just, I think, correctly formulated that the goal of these tools should be to act as kind of mental prosthetics that accelerate your workflows. I'm definitely going to be missing some important people, but I don't know. Those are all people that I'm inspired by.
Great, great. And yeah, I guess then just before we go, for any new users coming onto RemNote or people who are considering using RemNote, yeah, like what advice do you have to new users on RemNote, and what do you want people who are considering RemNote to think about?
I think that's a little bit of a difficult question to answer,
Mm.
in that it depends on the person and their goals, right? So I can talk about maybe a few. This is actually very relevant. I can talk about maybe a few kind of categories of users. In that, if you're coming to this from a space repetition perspective, I would just start exploring making cards, seeing if they work well for you or not. And don't worry about all the kind of power features. You really just want to get started, and then over time, as you become more comfortable, you can kind of improve the way that you're formulating your cards or your notes in general. So maybe space repetition users should focus on just making cards. People who are interested in writing evergreen notes, just start with maybe making multiple documents and using references to link things together. If you're interested in kind of just like daily scratch writing and things synthesizing themselves automatically, that daily notes thing has proven powerful for a number of users. And just making references can help things start to synthesize themselves. It's maybe becoming more meta really briefly. I think it's super difficult to provide a precise answer to this because everyone has slightly different goals, and they all are familiar with different kind of ideas that they've really internalized by using other tools. I don't think that a correct answer for how to effectively like onboard people here has been found yet. So just I guess maybe the most general advice is start experimenting for yourself. Look at what other people are doing. You're obviously helping the community with that, and just focus on kind of the mental workflows that you're trying to optimize and design things around that. I don't know if that's the right answer. Yeah.
That's a great answer. Well, thank you so much, Martin. This has been really great. I'm really excited for people to see this. It's definitely making me start to think about things in a little bit different way. I'm gonna start exploring spaced repetition more. I like this idea of this heuristic you seem to use of like, is this an idea that I want to be able to consistently play around with? You know, I love that. I think that's great. Thinking about it from the standpoint of optimizing search better, about, you know, like what the role is of the computer and of the user, and like what we want both parties to be doing. Very fascinating. So lots to think about from this. Thank you.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun.